Hi, I'm here with Klaas Ardanois. Klaas is the CTO at a business called Azoomee. Klaas is someone I've got to know pretty well over the last 6 months. And for those of you that haven't heard of Azoomee, fantastic business that creates content. It's a multimedia platform that creates content specifically for children and really allowing children to develop a lot of the skills that you'd want them to around persistence, self-management, being inquisitive, critical thinking. And as a father of three, it's a business that's really resonated with myself. And Klaas has got a great insight into how he's managed his career, how he's helped develop a great platform and a great product for scale, and also how he's engaged the team around him and hired some really talented people and nurtured that talent. So delighted to have you here, Klaas. Look, over to yourself. I've given a little bit of an insight into sort of you and Azoomee, but yeah, give us a bit of an oversight on your role and what you've been up to over the last few years with Azoomee.
Sure. And I think, so I've been at Azoomee since the very first day. Literally day one, I was there, hired as a CTO. And so I've kind of had a chance to see that transition from a CTO in a super early stage, startup, two guys in a garage type scenario, all the way to the business we are now, which is a business spanning an entity in Berlin and one in London, a group of about 100 people. And it's just been quite interesting to see how that role has changed effectively and kind of how my part in that has changed. And so I think if I think back about sort of, the first year, my entire role was kind of being almost a lead developer, a bit of architecture, quite a bit of hands-on coding. I had the good fortune of having a pretty good network, so I could hire 3-4 people I know quite well. Yeah. We went in there, sat down, built the thing that we knew how to build, and I'll get into that later on, I'm sure. And then sort of a year and a half in, it was time to sort of transition that early stage team who was great at going from zero to something into a team that was now good of maintaining something and evolving it, which is a slightly different skill set and a different mix of people. And so my role kind of shifted away from some of the harder technology and more into a people and process role. To, how do we deliver? What do we need? And with that came a lot more focus on the business side of Azoomee. It's one thing building a platform. It's another thing running a platform and getting people on it and using it. And so that became sort of the next 3 years of my life was very much kind of what I typically think of as more of a VP engineering type role, where you focus on the processes around it, the people in it, as opposed to the hard technical. And I'd say probably the last year and a half, 2 years that I've been at Azoomee, because it has been a 6-year journey pretty much by now. That was all about, we did an acquisition of another company, so there was a lot of skills there that are more around the financial side, the integration side. How do you do this? As a business, we had to scale not just our technology, but also our operations. So there was a lot of working with the chief operations, who's one of the co-founders, in kind of, what sort of processes outside technology do we need? How do we handle customer support in 20 languages? How do we make sure that all the great content that we get in, how do we make sure that actually gets onto our platform efficiently? And so that role has really shifted from what was a very early on lead dev role into an absolute C-suite role now.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into a bit of that because the breadth in your role over the last sort of year and a half has really expanded what you've been doing as a CTO. So we'll certainly get into a bit of that in a minute. So look, let's take this right back, Klaas. You found yourself in a CTO role in a growing, scaling business that's recently gone through it. That has acquired another business. So a fantastic role that you've been in the last 5 years. But let's take it right back. And let's sort of understand your career and the route you've taken to get to be a CTO. Look, take us back. Where did your interest in technology first come from?
I mean, that came all the way from when I was a little kid. I think, I've been full disclosure, I'm coming up to 40 years old now. So, I'm a kid of the late 80s, early 90s, very much.
Get out of it. You look a day over 30.
Yeah, I haven't looked a day over 30 for most of my life, unfortunately. But so, I mean, to give you an idea, I remember my dad bringing, 4 megabytes of RAM, like literally the hardware, into the house, and that being a big deal. if you talk about 4 megabytes of RAM these days, people go like, that doesn't hold an MP3 file, right? I've got PowerPoints that are more than that. So to put that in context, ever since I was about 5, 6 years old, I've been surrounded by technology. My dad did a bit of freelance coding beyond his normal job. One of my brothers, actually 2 of my brothers are in computer science as well. So there's just this natural thing in our house where I grew up. There was always some technology about. And so by the time I was about 18 and I got to uni, I kind of just rolled almost without thinking. I rolled into computer science and then got a bachelor's degree and then, did what every bachelor in computer science does. I got a software developer job and I just rolled forward from there. So I think I've got a very classical kind of background for a CTO, coming from, inundated by technology into computer science, into a developer role. And then I think where I maybe forked on a different path compared to many senior engineers in their careers, I'd say probably about 2-3 years in, I went into the more process side of engineering. So I started focusing on, how do teams operate, what makes a good architecture, how do you as a scrum master or a product owner, how do you kind of input to that team? Obviously having all that background of knowing what these guys do day to day and being able to talk code with them was really helpful. And I think even right now, I'm still happy to jump into architecture discussions. When I read stuff about new products and new technologies, I can easily frame where that sits and how that would be valuable. But equally, when an engineer comes back and talks to me about whatever problem they have in the team, it's easy for me to sit down and dive into that detail because there's all that background of software. And I think I hate the typical job description of your CTO needs to have 10 years of experience writing code, but there is some value in having that background.
Well, that's interesting, and you sort of segues into a little bit. Whenever we're working with businesses, whether it be usually a CEO that's looking to hire a CTO, there is always that. There's always on the job specification. This is a hands-off role. It's a strategic role. The role doesn't require any coding, but in my experience, CEOs are still very keen to know that the CTO could code if required, or could get right down to the code level if needs be. So you and I have had discussions. Where does a VP of engineering role face off with a CTO? Or when does that lead developer role go into a VP role, into a CTO role? So give us your perspective on that and how you've had to manage that through your own career as you've looked to sort of go through the ranks.
Yeah, I think to that point of sort of a CTO needing to code, I look at it slightly different and I frame it as a CTO needs to know enough to be dangerous, but he shouldn't be allowed near production code.
He can use his superpowers for good or for evil.
Exactly. It's like, what? We can sit down, we can talk code, I can help you debug, we can review code, we have ideas in style and standards, but please don't allow your CTO at a later stage. Obviously, at your very early stage, different story, but once you're in that Series A and beyond, don't let your CTO near your code in production. You're creating dependencies that are not worth it. There's pressure all around. Yeah. And your CTO should really focus on delivering different types of value as opposed to lines of code. But back to your initial question on sort of lead engineer, VP engineer, and then CTO and where they sit. I know you and I talked about this, but I think to me, a VP engineering is very much someone who looks inwards into the technology unit of the company. So they're typically going to be very engaged in the people and process side. It's, how do we get this group of engineers anywhere from juniors straight out of college grads, medium level, senior level, principal level, architect level, the whole gamut of engineering skills. How do we get that group of people to deliver business value in an efficient way? And it's inwards looking at that group of people in that system. What's the best setup? Contrast that with the CTO, which is kind of the outward facing part of that coin. The CTO is typically looking at, all right, this business wants to do X. How can we as technology enable this? What strategic things do we need to be on the lookout for? Whether that is, acquisitions of technology, whether that is looking at, machine learning is coming up. How could that help us? Which areas of our business could benefit from this? How could we deliver value to our clients? But it's less focused on how does that team run and more about what are they running towards.
So as you look at, if you're sort of giving out career advice, or you're looking at your own skill set, or the skill set of other peers and chief technology officers that you know, what would be the sort of 3 traits or the 3 behaviours that you'd see in a fantastic VP of engineering that you think marks them out as a future chief technology officer?
I think one is undoubtedly an amount of EQ. The ability to relate to people, to build teams, to galvanize teams, but also to take them through the difficult times. It's easy being a leader when everyone's happy. It's a lot harder if you're dealing with a whole bunch of difficult characters or systemic issues where maybe the business doesn't quite understand how technology operates, and then, as a VP engineering, you're sort of left with, what to do, but you can't quite get everyone to buy in. So that level of people skills in the broadest sense is one major differentiating factor in that role to me.
Yeah.
The other one is an amount of curiosity, which I think I look for in anyone I work with. If you're not curious about what's going on, there's a high risk of getting, first of all, sort of stealing your own skills, but also, and then this is maybe more personal than anything else, but if you're not constantly challenged by something new or something exciting, what are you doing this for? If you're not really interested in this, if you're not excited about it, then what are you really doing?
Yeah, interesting. So look, that leads quite nicely onto how you like to build and lead teams. And I know from discussions with peers and people in the market, that and people I know in your business, you've always had you've been able to identify, attract, and onboard a really talented team. So talk me through maybe some of the strategies and techniques that you've used to identify and attract the talent in the market to want to come and work with you and the businesses you've been representing.
Sure. I mean, to an extent, you're asking for my secret sauce, so maybe that's not good. But I think it's a combination of things. I'm a firm believer, first of all, that talent will attract other talents. So if you get the first few right, you will attract similar people. Whether that's good or bad is an entirely different topic. But I do know that if I find the right kind of people to put that kind of cornerstone couple roles in, you will find more and more of these people as they interview, as they know their friends. And so that's one part. The other part is and this goes slightly against your business, but I'm a firm believer in hiring from my own network.
As do I, so I get it, as do I.
And I think at Azoomee, within technology, I'd say we probably fill about 1 in 3 through connections, which I know is quite high in the industry. But that goes back to hire talent. They'll bring people along. And I think the last part to consider is, depending on the stage your software is at, you need slightly different people. I sort of roughly classify engineers in 3 types. There is the type that is really good in the early stages when you have nothing and you need something. And they're the guys who will, they're your traditional startup engineers that every startup wants. They're the guys who can do a bit of everything. They're pretty good. And, they're not really fussed with too much standards and sort of that sort of things. They're just genuinely people who like to build stuff.
Yeah.
And that's great in the early days, but that sort of unlimited freedom of going from nothing to something, once there is something, that gets constrained and they start to become unhappy.
Okay, yeah.
And so you need to bring in people who are happier working on, okay, there's a system there that I can evolve, that I can care for, and it's a different mindset where you go, it's not about constantly breaking and reinventing. It is about, how do I design and build for the future? And then as you get really big, you probably get people who are good at thinking about the future and people who are good at thinking about, okay, tomorrow I need to do this.
Yeah.
And so that's the 3 layers of engineers you go through.
Yeah, and interesting because how does that then how do you then employ your own skill set in developing people and managing people's careers and managing future projects? And because that can get challenging, right? There's always going to be, not finite, but I guess there are a number of routes that talented engineers can start to pursue in their own careers. So how have you been able to help your team navigate through the career options that are open to them?
And I think help is the operative word there. Um, Anyone who works for me that basically ends up in a regular one-on-one with me, I have two conversations with them. One is about, the job they do and then their day-to-day stuff, and then kind of how do we get you better at that. And the other part is forget the business we work in. Where do you want to be in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And how can I, in the current context, help you get there? Knowing full well that I'm actually basically training you to leave.
Yeah.
But in technology, teams don't have much longevity. 2-3 years, that's about the time people move. So I think in those 2-3 years, slightly selfishly, how do I get the most out of you? Is not by denying you the opportunity beyond that. It's actually by saying, look, let's just work on that together. And we both agree that this is a 3-year deal.
I think it was Richard Branson. Was it Richard Branson that said, teach people everything you know so they can leave, but treat them as well as you can so they don't want to leave. So it is inevitable, but interesting. Exactly. So look, fantastic. Thanks for that insight, Klaas. And again, one of the things we've sort of I mentioned at the beginning is, I've been told, that you like to build great product and great, use great technology and allow to build stuff that can scale. And we're in a world, or I'm certainly in a world where I speak to lots of businesses that are all talking about how can they scale their platform, scale their technology, re-architect. So talk us through maybe some of the challenges you've had around cloud technology choices and strategies around how you're going to scale, how you've been able to scale that platform.
So scale is an interesting one because scale has two dimensions. There is a dimension of sort of the classic cloud scale of more servers, easier capacity, easier sort of serving more users. And that's assuming that the software that runs stays stable, right? You deploy the same thing on more hardware and then it serves more people. That is the classic definition of scale in cloud. There's another aspect to scale that is, how does your software evolve? How does your product evolve? How do you prepare for not backing yourself in a corner with the product? And so it's finding that blend between those two things. To me, that is how you scale proper. And so, if you want to talk about cloud, clearly it's about having quite a bit of automation in there, kind of subscribing to all the sort of DevOpsy stuff that goes on around right now, where you treat infrastructure as code and therefore it goes through the same process as software engineering, and you're less worried about individual servers and you're more worried about how do I just have servers as the result of some process, and then you can scale it outside, which has a number of architectural impacts around, how do you design your services? How do you make them independently deployable? How do you deal with databases? How do you deal with replication around the globe? How do you deal with things like GDPR and data replication? How do you make sure that European data stays within safe havens or within Europe? But all of those are, to an extent, well understood problems. It might be tricky to go from your legacy architecture completely to that kind of architecture, but there is definitely a path that you can chart that will get people close to that. Yeah. The more interesting question when we talk about scale is, how do you design a system that is built to change? Like the one guideline I always gave to my team was, there are a few areas where we need to be absolutely right, and there are a lot of areas where we need to be prepared to tear it down completely and restart, or where we build a very generic piece of software and then configure it for the specific case, as opposed to building a specific solution. And I think that mindset is what has allowed Azoomee to change dramatically over the years. I mean, if I think back of the product we had in year 1 versus the product we have in year 6 now, I would say on the server side, the only service that is constant amongst all those things is the part that deals with users, where you log in, you have a child profile of some sort, and you get some list of content back. That core component hasn't really changed much. But anything outside of that has changed dramatically, been torn down, rewritten, switched around. We about a year ago, we entirely rewrote how we do billing and how we read. So in that sense, it's about admitting that you don't know the answer and therefore building to the extent that you're going to change it.
Yeah. Okay. And within your world as of late, well, you and I have had conversations about agile principles, and and you could I could speak to five different leaders, and they'll all adopt agile in different ways. So how's that journey evolved for yourself?
I mean, it's been a long journey, first of all, because before I moved to the UK, so I'm from Belgium originally. Before I moved to the UK, I was a consultant going into big companies, helping them be more agile. So I've kind of seen the whole gamut from the early days Scrum over Kanban, over Safe these days, and anything people do in between. And the longer I think about it and the more I look at it, the more I realize that a lot of companies are doing agile but not being agile. And I think that's a really big distinction. There is sort of the almost cargo cult of, I have my daily stand-up, I've got a Scrum board somewhere, or I've got a flow-based system. Now I can say I do Kanban. But actually, if you look at how the work gets decided, of how do you decide what goes in the next sprint, how do you decide what you're doing in your next sort of iteration, that's been predefined 6 months ago. So all you're doing is basically you're doing Prince 2 a little bit faster.
Yeah.
But you haven't moved to the idea of, I am willing to fundamentally change what I'm doing if it doesn't make sense or there's a better opportunity. And you know what, that's a very scary thing for many people, to give up that level of perceived control of, oh, I know what's going to happen in 6 months. But that's where you enable that agility of being able to say, actually, you know what, we shouldn't be doing this. This is the wrong thing to do. Let's just be critical towards ourselves rather than blindly following our next 6 sprints that we've laid out. And there's that balance between planning ahead and doing the thing that's right now.
Well, one of the, again, speaking with CTOs or maybe sort of other functional heads, maybe in product, operations, CEOs, one of the biggest challenges that businesses often have is the demotivation and unengagement of the software engineering team when they do feel that 1 minute they're moving left and then they're moving right and then we're stopping this and then we're starting that. So how do you get that balance of being agile, and to your point about being critical of yourself, but also your team not feeling that they're running down the street with jam on their face on any given day?
So I think that goes back to, there's an element of, you know what, as a CTO, you know what technologies are out in the market, what makes sense for you. And so one of the things that I always try to do is bring some of those into the team, whether they are special projects that we do, whether they are research type tasks of, this might enable something in the future. And that's how I sort of balance the part of the software engineer's job is literally day to day, write the code that is required for the thing to do what the business needs it to do. Yeah. And you can't deny that's a large part of why these people get hired and paid. Yeah. But if you dive underneath that a little bit, quite often, the thing that attracts engineers, and the way I attract them at least, is with problems. I try to avoid solutions, and I try mostly to think about problems. Okay. And I go, you know what, here's an interesting piece of technology. Give me your one pager on what it could do for us, or how it would fit into this sort of problem space. Or I'm struggling with enabling X. What do you guys think? And so just throw these things into the team and give them something to think about that is fundamentally mine to control as a CTO. And I can guarantee that actually, you know what, no, this is a discrete thing that we're going to finish. To give you an idea, at Azoomee, was it last summer? Yeah. We did a whole series of work within my team around how could we use all these NLP, text-to-speech, all that sort of machine learning goodness to help us with subtitles for videos, to help us with identifying, actually, this video is about bananas and monkeys or science or maths or whatever it is. And just, the tech isn't quite production ready, but this is a cool engineering thing. Let's just engineer it.
Yeah, interesting. And look, obviously we were talking about your role as a CTO and how much breadth it's taken on. And we're talking about scaling technology. Again, a big part of any CTO's role today is either to get the technology ready for some type of capital event, whether acquisition, trade sale, whatever that might be. Obviously, you, as of late, have been very much involved with Azoomee in the acquisition of another business. So maybe talk me through how that's given breadth to your skill set and how your role as a CTO has been stretched as you've worked with a business to go and acquire another business?
Sure. And I think there is one peculiarity in my background in that I have an MBA in corporate finance, which is not a common thing amongst CTOs as far as I can tell. And so during the acquisition, my role kind of suddenly stretched into financial modeling and sort of going, look, how does that business really operate, regardless of their technology capacity? Just from a business point of view, how do they operate? Where are they strong? What kind of costs do they put? But then I put on my CTO hat and I can easily see, well, if you put this much in that kind of technology, that's good, bad, too much, too little, maybe a little bit more there. So that was a very interesting blend between skills to have there. As far as actual technology, it was almost stepping into a CIO role at that point, and kind of taking a much broader look beyond software and beyond tech teams as we have been talking about so far, and a lot more into what else have these guys got, right? In this particular instance, we ended up in discussions around migrating email servers and data centers, office security. So it was really just stretching that out much beyond a sort of traditional pure tech role, and really going into the sort of the stuff that you would typically see on a kind of ISO 27001 in terms of security measures. What do you have in place? What's your hardware setup like? How do people operate? What teams? What do you use in terms of Skype or WhatsApp or Microsoft Teams? And really bringing all that into one place afterwards.
Yeah. And look, that again, time's nearly going to get the better of us, but that segues fantastically well into, again, conversations you and I have had about, look, we're in the middle. Well, we're not in the middle of lockdown. I hope we're not in the middle of it. Hopefully, we're near the end of lockdown, and we're now starting to. Businesses have gone through the sort of immediate action plans on what we're going to do. And now everyone's thinking about how we're going to come out of lockdown and what strategies we're going to employ from both business acquisition, technology utilization, strategies, etc. So some of the conversations I'm having fairly regularly at the moment, everyone's now used to working from home, right? So that's happened. But I guess some of the choices now are going to be about real estate strategies. I think most people have sort of employed the technology tools that they want to continue using from a collaboration standpoint. But how do you see the challenge for business? What do you see as the biggest challenges for business right now as they look to navigate out of lockdown?
And I think there's one distinction that I'm not sure everyone's picked up on yet, but there is a big difference between working at home when a crisis is going on outside and there are no restaurants, no bars, no social events, your kids can't go to school. I mean, you said it yourself, one of your kids is now doing arts and crafts week at home right now. Clearly, that is not working from home as it would have been pre-virus, right? You're in a crisis trying to get some stuff done at home while you've got the kids running around. So I think you have to slightly look forward and go, look, at some point, social life is going to resume in some way, shape, or form. Kids are going to be out of the house back into school. Offices are going to be open and available. And so in that scenario, what does that mean? I think my personal view is we're going to move to a world where hot desking becomes much more of a practice in companies. I think if I think about Azoomee and where we are working through essentially offering people a choice between either you're a predominantly work remote person and therefore, we will make accommodations for you to work remotely in terms of, the hardware you've got, stuff you need. But the flip side is when you do come to our office, you have no fixed desk. There is nothing there for you in that sense. Or you are predominantly an office person and therefore we'll accommodate you in an office with all the stuff that comes with that. Clearly, if you do want to work a day or two from home, go ahead. But we're not really going to be accommodating that as we would with a predominantly remote person. I think that's where we seem to end up. And from talking to some friends and other people in the industry, that seems to be across quite a lot of businesses that is being considered. I mean, personally, I see a lot of value in being able to sit in a room with 3-4 people and have a discussion, whether that's architecture, whether that is something quite strategic where, you've got a whiteboard and you're drawing boxes. But equally, I know that there's some types of work I do that is literally I put my headphones on even at home and I bang it out and then that is the kind of work that I think is going to be harder to replicate in an office.
Yeah, and look, there's a large part of society saying we've all proven that we can work from home, and therefore the requirement to go back into the office will be significantly less. But that then does come with the challenges of, to your point, you like being in a boardroom with a whiteboard with 2 or 3 colleagues mapping stuff out. Can that truly be replicated in this environment across Zoom?
So me and a couple of friends were actually joking about building a VR app to solve that problem.
Okay.
Because there is something nice and tangible about being in that room, seeing people. I forgot where I read it, but it was some psychologist did a study about why Zoom calls are so much more tiring than a normal conversation with 4 or 5 people. And one of the points they made was you have no way of having a side conversation with the guy or the girl next to you. You know, if you miss something in a big meeting and you nudge your mate, say, hey, what was that? That's fine, that happens. And the other part is that body language is a lot harder to pick up over a call than it is over just being next to each other. And so I see a lot of value there, but I'm not quite sure how we resolve that in an entirely digital world.
Yeah, no, interesting. Well, look, as I said, time does get the better of us. And it's great to get a great overview on some of your career choices, Klaas, and some of the work you've been doing around hiring great talent and scaling great technology. It's a shame we couldn't sort of dive deeper into each of those, but I've really enjoyed catching up. It's been great to get to know you over the last sort of 6 or 7 months. And thanks for your time today.
No, mate, thanks for having me.
Cheers, Klaas. All the best.